This morning, I want to bring before you what's called traveling through the rough roads of life. And this message actually started developing almost a year back when, exactly during this time, we had to make almost a trip a week to Delhi to take care of first Nathan, and then Valentina, all the paperwork with the US Embassy. And it was sometimes heavy rain, sometimes really bad. And they have started constructing this flyovers near the McDonald's, and it was just almost impossible to make it to Delhi on time. So we said we won't go through the McDonald's route. We'll go through the other road, which is the Kharar Banu road that goes all the way and then connects to Ambala. Well, it just so happened that they decided that they're going to make that road as well. So we were left with no option because this was congested always, and they had decided to make this road all over again. And we just had to struggle going through those roads when it was semi-paved, when it was unpaved, when it had gravels, when it was unsurfaced, and all those sorts of things. We had no option but to go through those roads. Well, I love driving, and if you give me an option whether to drive long distance or stay at home, I would say, okay, I'm going to go and drive. The road conditions don't necessarily bother me. And because I'm able to tune off everything, even the noise in the car, even the music the children play it time to time, I'm able to tune off everything. And I just love the sound of the engine and the feel of the tires on the road, and just, you're doing something. You're going from one point to the other, and you keep going. And we as a family have undertaken many, 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 many road trips. And ever since the children were small, from the time they were 6 months old, strapped them in the car seats, booster seats, and we used to drive. We used to drive all over. And we have undertaken some really, really, really tough routes, and over a period of time. But that's not my point. My point this morning is that if you are on the road, if you are going from one point to the other, not always, not necessarily, you will have good roads. Let me talk about the good roads. One of the best drives I've ever done is drive from New York City all the way to Buffalo, New York, which is upstate New York State, and on the way to Niagara Falls. And that's got some of the most beautiful scenery that I have ever seen in my life. The roads are good, mountains, and not too hilly. The roads are really good, and it's just a beautiful drive. And I think if given a chance, you and I, if we had our way, we would say, I want to be on such a road all through my life. I want the beauty of the mountains. I want the smoothness of the road. I want the landscape. I want a good destination. And I wish I had that. But the reality again is, it's not always like that. Let me define for you, before we proceed any further, let me define for you what possibly a rough road is. Speaking in terms of the roads, I've already said, unpaved road, gravel roads, roads with potholes, which many places in India is famous for. And you hear the news about accidents, and it's raining and you don't know where the pothole is. Husband and wife going on a scooter, they crash and they lose their lives. Mumbai, the rains are about to start. Those are bad roads. Those are the rough roads. Because there's a lot of wear and tear, that it takes a lot of your mental patience to drive through that. And that's what defines a physical rough road. But how do I connect that? How do I connect that to my life? What could possibly be a rough road in my life? Defining that. A rough road is not a bad road that you make by choice. Let's get that very clear. It's not something that you have chosen, that you have the option of going on a good road or you're going on a bad road. Rough roads just are hindrances that just come about your way. You are smoothly chugging along. You are being obedient to God. You have the clarity of God's word. You have all those things in place, but you still come across hurdles. You still come across disturbances that interrupt your daily routine. So that's the first roughness that I want to talk about. What else is a rough road? Where the going gets tough. Sometimes there are roadblocks. Sometimes there are fallen trees. Sometimes there's an accident when you just cannot proceed with life and you say, what's happening? What else is a rough road? Rough road is you are working smoothly in your office, everything is going well, you have made your report, you have completed your project, and you are taking it to your boss, and suddenly your computer crashes. Or I have seen this happen. You know, you're an architect, and you create this model, and you are about to make this presentation, and suddenly you trip, and that model falls, and you say, what did I do to deserve this? It's not something that you have chosen for yourself. It's not something that you could avoid. It just happened. It just happened. And there are many things in our lives that just happen, which we do not want, which makes the going rough, but it just happens. I also want to suggest to you that if you are living a real life, one time or another, you will have it rough. You will have interruptions. You cannot say that my life is going on so smooth, my life is going on so well that there are no interruptions, no hindrances, nothing is breaking down, and everything is going smoothly. If I were to ask you this morning, if I were to say, can you say that my life is just so well, that God has blessed me with so much, everything is so well, no interruptions, no roughness, it's just going smooth? And if you were to say yes, I'll say, okay, I wish my life was like yours, because my life is rough. I like to use the word navigate, and I use that when I'm talking to my children. There's just so much that you have to navigate through in your life, just like the road full of potholes that you don't want to break your axle, you don't want your tire to burst, you don't want to damage the rim, you don't want the engine to go out of control, you don't want the gravel to break your oil sump if you're driving your car. You have to navigate those potholes so that you make it till the very end. And again, the whole idea is you make it to the very end. The road is not about the destination. For you and I as believers, I want to say to you that our destiny is already before us. Destiny is already outlined. When we gave our life to the Lord, our destiny is eternal life in heaven. But to get there, you're not going to die today. God has given you a life full of purpose, a life full of meaning. And for God to be unfolding that meaning on a daily basis, unfolding that purpose on a daily basis, you still go through a lot of hardship. Is our life without struggle? No, it's not. I want to bring before you a few passages from the Bible which show how a few men were faced with rocky roads and how they made it. If you look at Genesis, and there's the account of the life of Noah. Now, some people or the historians will say that there was no rain up until it rained in Noah's time. So when God told Noah, when God asked Noah, you have to build this ark, you have to do this, do you think Noah completely understood what God was saying? In my mind, more than understanding, Noah believed that if God is saying this to him, if God said, this is what's going to happen, he believed that this was going to happen. This was going to take place. There would be a flood. And if he wanted to be safe, if he wanted his family to be safe, if he wanted to protect his life, he had to obey God. Can you imagine how long it took for Noah to build the ark? Are we aware of the number of years? These days, India is developing super highways. Mercy talked about them in the Hindi service. There's lots of good highways all over India. And one of my dream is to be able to travel from Delhi to Mumbai on the new expressway that's coming up, and the test run is always done. And then that will be the best highway in India. And I hope one day I have a great car and I can drive that, because you can do that in 12 hours all the way to Mumbai. So infrastructure development is really, 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 really fast these days. How much do you think, how was it in Noah's time when he had to build the ark, when all he had was his sons to help him and maybe a few others in his own household? Well, there's calculations done all over, and if you try to research about it, it could easily be 50 years, 50 to 70 years just to build the ark. Now, for somebody to hold on to what God has said, start building and keep doing that 50, 70 years with the ridicule of the people around him. Why ridicule? What is this boat for? What on earth do you do with a boat? Why is God going to destroy the world? The ridicule that Noah faced. How did he get through his rough road? By knowing that God, when he has said something, he's going to do it. If this is God's plan, it will unfold. It will happen. A few chapters down in the life of Abraham. Now, Abraham, God promises that his descendants will be like the sand of the seashore. Right? That's God's promise. And Abraham is getting old, and Sarah is getting old, and he tries to bring in his own intelligence into this whole equation. And he says, oh, maybe not through Sarah, but through Hagar. And he does all that. He says, oh, but God says it is going to be through your son, yours, Abraham, and Sarah's son, Isaac, that my promise to you is going to unfold. So Abraham says, okay, I believe you. And then Isaac is born. And then what happens? Sometimes you and I face a similar test. God doesn't ask us to kill our own sons. Maybe if he did, we'll close our ears and not believe it. But Abraham said, okay, God promised me my descendants will be like the sands in the seashore. But now he says, sacrifice your own son. I got to obey. How do you get through this rough road in life? Believing where God is taking you and what he has promised you, and not worrying about other things. You got to remember, it's God who gives. Exodus 2. Another man, Moses, who faced it rough in his life. His parents couldn't keep him. One of the princes adopted him, lived in and grew up in Pharaoh's palace. And then one day he finds himself in a place where he has to kill this guard or the Egyptian, and he's on the run. He's on the run for 40 years. He's in the wilderness. That's when he has an encounter, and he's he finds God, and God speaks to him, God shows him what he needs to do. And then Moses leads the Israelites another 40 years. The Bible says he's the one who came closest to God. So how do you get through that rough road of being in the wilderness, being on the run for 40 years, and then in the wilderness again for 40 years, 80 years of your life? No matter what you have, it's that intimacy with God that matters. It doesn't matter if you have it comfortable. It's your intimacy with God that matters. What about King David in 2 Samuel? We read that God has anointed David to be king. But at the same time, King Saul is still there. King Saul is still king. And King Saul finds out that everybody favors David. And so he gets jealous. He gets jealous because David kills Goliath, and everybody is singing, Saul has slain thousands and David what? Tens of thousands. So he says, oh, this guy David comes from nowhere. I'm king and he's put me to shame. And so Saul is hunting David, and that hunt, even though David is king, even though Samuel is anointed David as king, David is on the run, and he's on the run for several years. How does David survive that? And you can read that account in 2 Samuel. David could have killed Saul anytime. Once he was in a cave, and David and his 600 men were inside, and Samuel came in at the mouth of the cave. David cuts off the robe. He could have killed Saul anytime. But what does he say? I will not lay my hands on the Lord's anointed. So how do you get through that rough road? Believing that God is there to fight your battles and take you through your struggles than taking matters in your own hands. Now, what does it mean to take matters in your own hand? Let's talk about that. What does it mean that, if nobody is doing something, if God is not doing anything, I'm going to do what I want to do? I found this quotation somewhere just recently. It said, God's clock doesn't work the same as your clock. And what that means is, you think that God should do this, and this at this particular time because it suits you. But God says, no. I know more, and my thoughts are far above yours, and I'm going to bring it to pass when I think it's right. So, David knew that he was going to be king, but he didn't want to short circuit God's timing by taking Saul's life. In fact, when Saul does die or is about to die, and the man who actually killed Saul and thinks that he's done such a great deed, David has him killed because how dare you lay your hand on the Lord's anointed? God is there to fight your battles, and that's how you go through rough roads. What about Job, the man who had it all? What about Job, the man who had it all? He probably the definition of comfort, the definition of wealth, the definition of luxury, the definition of all that you want to have was Job thousands of years back. And God decided that he was going to let Satan take all those things from him. And he wanted to see what Job's response was going to be like. How did Job get through that rough road in his life? Job believed in the sovereignty of God, and he said, it's God who gives, and it's God who takes. Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah. And this is chapters 27, 28, 29. And Jeremiah is telling all the Israelites that you all are going to be taken away to exile. And it says there that Jeremiah says, anybody who goes through exile will be safe, but anybody who chooses not to go through exile or not to go through that hardship is going to lose their life. So if the Israelites tried to escape exile, there was no safety for them. How hard was it for the Israelites in exile to be treated as slaves? Yet for the sake of their lives, it was better for them to go through exile. So how do you go through this rough life? Believing in God's plan for your life, that He is there working out every equation that will take you through life for His glory. Same in exile when it comes to Daniel. Daniel is way up in the bureaucracy in the Persian kingdoms. But he gets thrown into the lion's den for what? For standing for his beliefs. Sometimes you and I, when we stand up for our beliefs, we may not actually be thrown into the lion's den, but we face it like the lions are after us. In your job, in your workplace, in your school, in your college, for standing up for your beliefs, what happens? You're ridiculed, you're mocked. You are not able to face it. It's like you are thrown into the lion's den, like Daniel was. And same thing happens to his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The tall statue, you don't bow down, you're going to be thrown into the fiery pit. But check out the response in Daniel 3. They say, they are standing before the mighty king Nebuchadnezzar. This is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they say, God is able to protect us from you. But even if He does not, and that's what's important for us, that even if God at that moment does not protect you and I, that does not give us a license to compromise on our stand for God. You never know. It might be for God's glory that you're thrown into the pit. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the pit. If you are persecuted for God's name, it is for His glory. And they say, even if God does not rescue us, we will not bow down to that God. You and I, when we face it rough, we cannot compromise. We cannot go down, we cannot bow down to any other God, because our God is a living God. What about Jonah? And you say, why? What did he have rough that I am listing it in people who had it rough? He had it rough because God gave him a tough task of going to preach against the mighty city of Nineveh. And he knew, the scholars, you learn that he knew that later on in the years to come, it is the people from Nineveh, the Assyrians, who are going to come back and hurt Israel. So he says, I can sort that equation out right now. I won't preach the gospel to them. I won't show them God's way. And Nineveh will be doomed. So nothing will happen to Israel in the future. So he tried to run away. And what happens? He ends up in the tummy of this big fish. 3 days, becomes stinking with all the bile. And he ultimately does what God wanted him to do. How do you handle this rough road? By knowing that you cannot run away from God anywhere. We were reading Psalm 139 for our family devotions past few weeks, trying to take it verse by verse. And it says there, Psalm 139, that there is nowhere that I can go where God does not know I am there. Judges. I like this passage in Judges, and the story goes that the tribe of Benjamin is currently against the rest of the Israelites. And so Israelites decide that they're going to set things right and they're going to fight against the Benjamins. And so they ask God, shall we go and fight against the Benjamins? So God says, yeah, go and fight. So they go and fight, and Israel loses. So they're all crying, they're confused, they are messed up, and they're saying, God, you said, go and do this. We did it, and we still lost. So when the wailing is over, they ask God again, now what should we do? Go and fight again. So they go and fight again. And second time they lose. So again, the whole process, what did you do? You said go, we lost. You and I think that every time we ask God, I want to do this, we're going to have victory. No. You will have victory when God gives you the victory. Bible says the third time the Israelites went up against the tribe of Benjamin, it's at that time God says, go, for today I will give you the victory. It's not when the others wanted victory. It's when God said, you will have victory. So how do you get through the rough roads in life? By waiting patiently for God to answer your prayers and give you the victory. And you look at the Gospels itself, you look at the life of Christ, and you know that he had it rough. He had the struggles. He was opposed by the Pharisees. He was persecuted, and he was hung on the cross. For you and I, we cannot imagine a rougher road, a rougher life. You and I will never face what Jesus faced. And that's a fact. But Jesus remained obedient even unto death. And that's why you and I are here today talking about him. Because if Jesus had not remained obedient all the way to the cross and to death and to resurrection, none of this would be meaningful. None of this. There would be no purpose. There was no purpose for us to participate in the Lord's table. It's because he has already had the victory. He's already won over death, that you and I can celebrate his table, remember his death, and the life with which we have. So what do we learn? What do we learn about rough roads? I want to suggest to you that rough roads are not something that Satan brings about your way. It's not a choice that you make. It's not something that gets thrown to you and you say, if you go this way, it's going to be rough. If you go this way, it's going to be smooth. It's not something that Satan orchestrates. Because what we see from the Bible is tough things happen in life just because life itself is tough. If you think of the life of the prophet Ezekiel, he had to lay down on one side for how long? 300 some days. And then he had to lay down on the other side for another period of time. Why? Just because God asked him. That was to represent the bondage that the nation of Israel was going to have. Did he have it tough? To be a man of God, he had it tough. It was not something that Satan orchestrated in his life. It's just something that God allowed to happen. So for you and I, when we encounter hardship in our life, it's not something that Satan has brought about. One of my biggest weaknesses is rough roads. Because if something breaks down, and for me, it always is, number one, internet. If it breaks down, I'm messed up. Number two is my computer. Number three is my tablet. Number four is my phone. Number five is something in the kitchen. If the gas doesn't work or if the food is not okay, numbers, I can go on. It's some of those ridiculous things. But, and we We tease Nathan. If he doesn't get food, his face changes. That's his rough road. He has to be able to eat and get through his day. But here's what it means to be traveling through rough roads. God allows you to go through rough roads not because he wants to give you a hard time, but because he wants to see your attitude and your dependence on him and your trust in him, your belief in him, that he is able to take you through those rough roads onto his purpose and onto his destination. You and I keep on track like Noah did. 50 some years, all the while he's building the ark, facing the ridicule, but he's still on track. Keep believing like Abraham did, in spite of impossibilities that he had in his life. He kept believing, and God credited it to him as righteousness. You and I keep doing what we need to do, just like Moses did. Don't try to take matters in your own hands. Don't try to solve your own problems, because it's God who's leading the way, and he will solve the problems for you. You learn from David that when you let God take care of things, he is glorified and you have no concern. You read through the Psalms, and that's an expression of man after God's own heart, expressing to God how God has taken care of him. Do not sin in any way in your hardship. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not sin, they did not compromise, they did not bow down to that idol. Accept what God is giving you for that season. You wish the road was smooth, but it's tough, it's hard. I still need to be able to navigate through those potholes. I still need to be able to navigate through those traffic jams. I still need to be able to make choices which glorify God, and those choices which are honorable in his sight, and choices which reflect your trust in God, your belief in God, your belief in God's sovereignty. And here's a tough one. Do not ever be afraid to accept a reduced status in life. Sometimes you and I will not have anything in your wallet. I forgot my wallet is there, and this is the belt pack I have here. But you and I sometimes will not have money in our wallets, and you say, oh, how do I handle this? How do I handle buying food for the family? How do I handle paying the bills? How do I handle this? Sometimes you have to accept those reduced moments in life. Why are they reduced? Because you don't have all that you want. It's not that you don't have all that you deserve. It has nothing to do with you and I deserving something, but sometimes you and I don't have what we need. And still we need to go through that. And there's a whole equation, and there's a whole sermon about handling needs and wants. And we cannot get into that right now, but even in that, God is able to take you through those moments when you have nothing in your wallet. Do not compromise ever on your morals, on your spiritual stance, and on your beliefs, just like Job. Job's own wife said, curse God and die. And Job's response was, shall we accept only good from God? God gives and he takes away. And that's what you and I need to understand, that what we have is what God has given us. Enjoy that. Sometimes we'll be alone. If you're standing for God, I already said sometimes you will be alone. But keep remembering that God will always be there with you. What's the practicality of all this? It takes time to go through the rough roads. When you have a smooth road, the going is easy, The expressways that have come 120 kilometers an hour, you just floor it. You have an automatic, you don't need to worry about anything. You're just going, you're just going, you're just going. The only interruption is sometimes a car that is driving slower than you. But you're going, you reach your destination really fast. But if it's a rough road, it takes time, and you have to be patient. It takes sacrifice, because when you're going on a rough road, your tires are going to wear out, your patience is going to wear out, your whole body, there's a lot of wear and tear. One can lose so much. If you let the hardship get to you, and if it lets it frustrate you, and you stop, you will never get to your destination. And you and I, we cannot ever stop. It's always quite difficult. One wrong move and you break your axle or you burst your tire. You cannot afford to make any wrong moves. And in the end, it's not over up until God says it's over. And when is God going to do that? When is God going to say it's over for you? Not up until He takes you with Him to be in heaven. Sometimes I wish Jesus would come now. I wish that most of the time. Because life is tough. Life is hard. And you're thrown with so many choices, and you wish, I wish it was over, because then I'm up there in heaven and I have nothing else to worry about. There are no more tears in heaven. And I'm just tired with all my tears. It's just going to be so great in heaven. The prayer you and I need to pray this morning is, Lord, I have it rough. I have it hard. I'm trying to navigate the potholes of the life you have given me. Help me to never compromise. Help me to never stop doubting in your goodness, in your faithfulness, in your promises, and in what you have assured me. Help me to lead a life, because I will be with you soon in heaven.